Up. Thanks to you all for joining. I appreciate everybody coming today. I know there's a whole bunch of options. There's tons to see, and we do appreciate you coming to watch us build apps for SharePoint using Access. My name is Scott McFadden. I'm new to the Access team. I've only been on the team for about 6 months now, so I'm kind of a rookie Access user. Jeff Conrad here, who's my counterpart, has been working in Access about 6 or 7 years, so he kind of knows it inside and out. And speaking of inside and out, he actually wrote the Access Inside Out book. So if you have any questions or you want to get an autograph, this guy right here is the one to help you out. So come up afterwards, ask questions. We will make sure there's time at the end to have questions, and we'll have as much help as we can get you guys before we get kicked out. Okay? Okay, so today's objectives. Introduction to Access 2013, and learn how to build SharePoint apps using Access. When you leave the room today, the takeaways, we want you to know that Access 2013 is about creating SharePoint apps. We've moved to the web model, and we will create SharePoint apps using Access. End users can create these apps. It's not just the professional developer who will create these apps. Myself, I'm not a developer. I'm brand new to the team, as I mentioned. And the first day, I was able to get up and running and start creating an app. So it really is that easy. Yep. And these apps are centrally managed. They're secure. They're pretty awesome. So why Access? I could go on and give you a whole bunch of reasons why. I can give you a few reasons, and we can jump into demos and show you. So the main thing is, I mentioned they're easy to create. They manage your data. It's secure, easy collaboration. And they're, like I said, they're pretty cool apps, and they're very easy to create. So moving forward, desktop Access apps. There's a ton of them out there right now. There's millions of users using desktop apps. We're not giving up. We're still supporting these. The data is stored in a local file. It requires Access client to view and edit your data. Okay, that's how it's always been. Moving forward to the web apps, we're bringing the Access database into the future. We're allowing you to store your data in SQL, which is pretty great. It's a big new thing for us. And accessible everywhere. So if you're using IE, that's fantastic. If you're not using IE, it's OK. We're not going to judge. That's cool. That's cool. We'll make sure you have access to your data from whatever you're using. So this is kind of a participation here. Top issues with data management today. These may not be the top 7 issues, but I'm guessing, if I could see a show of hands, anybody who recognizes any of these issues that they may have seen managing their IT data, just get your hand in the air if there's anything you recognize. You may get a prize. Look at all the hands go up. That's fantastic. So we're focusing on trying to solve some of these problems. Ultimately, it'd be great to solve all the problems, but we want to make sure we make headway and solve a lot of these problems with Access 2013. Okay, so managing your data. People's data is stored everywhere. I manage my data everywhere. Some of it's in my head. I forget it. Some of it's on paper, sticky notes, Word, PowerPoint, Excel. It's everywhere. And there's so much to manage, I freak out a little bit. I never go extreme, but I do freak out a little bit. Not as bad as this guy here. He's data overload. He's gotten to the point where he has too much to do, too much to manage. He looks like he's basically given up. Fetal position, thumb in his mouth. His emotions.
Is this guy on our team?
This is nobody on our team.
OK.
Not anymore. No. He's using a Mac. Maybe that's why he's panicking right now. You can see his emotions have gone from upper left. He wants to implicate his boss in insider trading, and then he thinks he should go to sensitivity training. And later on, he's asking his boss for a raise. He's a little bit panicked. He doesn't know how to manage his data. Too much to do. So the virtues of apps, structured and simple. So what this slide's showing you here, upper left, simple, unstructured apps. There's some great things about those we all like. It's the investment, upfront investment. To use these is easy. People recognize how to use apps that they're familiar with. Easy to evolve and iterate. So if you're using Excel, for example, adding data to a row in Excel, most everybody can do that. It's simple. It's great. Easy to adopt. But on the flip side, in the bottom left, devices. Just because something is unstructured or simple doesn't mean that everything works well. Collaboration, using multiple instances of Excel or multiple instances of transferring information in email, it can easily get out of sync. Data that's managed in different ways is difficult to analyze. So what we're looking to do, we're looking to take the simple, unstructured on the left-hand side, combine that with the structured, simple virtues from the right-hand side, and this is the access sweet spot here. We know that there are going to be some things that are vices from a structured system, high upfront investment. We don't want that. We're looking to make sure that's not part of the access mission moving forward. Okay? So this is our focus. This is our customer base. Now, a lot of people think access is about professional developers. When I joined the team, that's what I thought. I saw some demos of what we're working on, and I realized that I can do this. This is something I can do as a PM. My background is design. It's not writing code. But professional developers, you can do it too. We're not taking that away. You can use Visual Studio. You can be a power user like myself, which I don't consider myself a power user. If you look at professional developers on the right, power users on the left, I'm somewhere just off to the left of the power user. Brand new user, kind of muddling my way through, but I can still make this work. So Access Services, 2013. This is for the power user or the simple less than power user like me, focusing on apps for SharePoint. Now, Napa is focusing on a solution for Office, apps for Office, for a little bit more talented developer. And then you have the Visual Studio user, developer, who they can do things for Access, they can do things for SharePoint, they can do things for Office, but they're using a tool that's really catered to their needs as a professional developer. Our focus, solving all these problems, but making sure it's easy for that power user or just left of power user to actually build apps in SharePoint with Access. So with that, we're going to do a lot of handing off. I'm going to move over now and hand off to Jeff. Jeff's going to show you how to build an app very quickly, fingers crossed, in 60 seconds. And he'll show you a pretty fun app that we're working on. We're in New Orleans. People are having a great time. I'm sure you've all gone out and had good food, maybe a drink or two. Two?
Yeah.
Two.
Okay.
I've had two. So we're going to do an app here that allows you to track the drinks you've had, maybe while you're in New Orleans. So Jeff?
There was a lot of laughter there. I'm not quite sure about this.
I'm not kidding.
So, as Scott mentioned, just realize, since I'm going to be talking over this, could take a little bit more than 60 seconds. But this is Access 2013, and this is our new Getting Started screen. That first icon that you see is Custom Web App. So if you click Custom Web App, to create an Access Web App, we essentially just need two things from you. We need a site name, and for this one, we'll just call it Consumption. And the other thing we need is a web location, essentially a SharePoint site that you have permissions to create web apps. Now, instead of typing all of this, I already have it on my clipboard. We have a site tenant already set up. I'm going to click Create. And what's happening behind the scenes here is we are creating a SharePoint site app with a SQL backend. If you're running on Office 365, that backend is SQL Azure. If you're running on-prem, it's going to be a SQL 2012 local DB. And this is all happening behind the scenes. Unbeknownst to the user, we're actually creating all of this. So there's a lot of moving parts that are happening here behind the scenes. But we're doing all of this for you. Let me switch over so you can essentially see what the completed app would look like. With the consumption there. We're going a little bit slower here. Everyone's hitting the network, I guess. So let me just jump back into here real quick so you can see essentially what I did. Oh, unexpected. Somebody is actually... Yeah, interesting. It's got to be a demo issue. Of course. Nothing ever goes wrong in demos. So what we did essentially behind the scenes, we created that site. As you can see up on the top here, we have the SharePoint Chrome. I can navigate up to the parent site. After Access created that app, I just went to a table template. There was one called Consumption Log. I just clicked on Consumption Log, and what happens is it created 4 tables for me called Consumption Log, Items, Contacts, Categories, and we created 2 views for every one of those tables. We give you this UI with a control for each of the specific controls on there, for each field. You can easily start adding data immediately. The UI that we present to you, this is HTML and JavaScript, and all of that is just behind the scenes, so the typical Access user who's just kind of dabbles in a little bit of database development, they don't have to know anything about HTML or JavaScript or even necessarily SQL. So let me switch back to slide deck here. So just to recap on that first part, all we need is the site name and the actual URL to a specific SharePoint site that you have permissions to. We have an add tables screen, and so you essentially have 3 ways to start creating tables. You can use one of our table templates. I used a consumption log one, and it had those 4 tables. You can also start from scratch, and later on, Scott's actually going to show creating a blank table. You can also import data, and whenever you import new data, we create a table as well as those 2 views for it. When you launch it in the browser, it's essentially ready to go. I can immediately start entering data. So we have essentially 3 particular big components of what's going on here. We have the web app part with our new app model, and the app model is essentially the UI that we present to you with the tables on the left, the views that are associated, and the detail forms for data entry as well as summarizing the data. We have that SharePoint deployment, so IT is happy. It's all hosted within SharePoint. There's backup, there's restore, all the goodness that we get with SharePoint, and we have a SQL backend as well. For those that have been working with 2010 web databases, our data store was SharePoint lists. So the big difference with our web app story is all the data is stored within SQL, directly within SQL. So you can have tens of thousands of records, millions of records. We've even done testing on millions of records. So that new app model, and you're going to see a lot more of the UI presented here in my demos as well as Scott's demos as well. So you're going to see more of the specific kinds of controls. You can get this up and running very quickly. You can actually customize it more within Access if you want, or you can just use essentially what we give you. But you have an automatic generation of forms for data entry and summarizing that information. It's polished, it's clean. We've actually seen internally some, I'll use the term hideous, UI access databases. I won't name any names. With SharePoint, of course, we get all the great things that come with SharePoint. We have, as Scott mentioned earlier, the cross-browser support. So if you're not an IE fan, you can certainly use one of the other browsers. Should work just fine. We get the Active Directory. We can use the app catalog. You can package up your app package and then deploy that internally. You can also host it up in the SharePoint store, and Scott later on is going to talk about the SharePoint store. Simple install, and of course, it's all centrally managed by your IT. If you're hosting through Office 365, then all the services are being provided by Microsoft, and of course, if there's services issues, then it's Microsoft's issue that we need to make sure the service is up and running. And of course, SQL, the gold standard. We have SQL Azure again if you're in Office 365, and SQL 2012 if you're in Loco. And I do see a question. Yes?
You say that the data is being stored in SQL, but it's not going to, is that just adding additional tables in the configuration database or in the content database or in the content database for your SharePoint site?
So the question, just so for the people that couldn't quite hear, is the data being lived in the content DB with SharePoint? The answer is no. We are provisioning and creating a completely separate SQL database for every Access web app that you create. It is not impacting the SharePoint content DB. It's a good question.
It's on the same SQL server, though, that your SharePoint is
It can be, and that depends on how your SharePoint admins have configured everything. Good question.
So I see a lot of hands going up right now. We will make sure we save time at the end. So if you have questions, to allow us to get through the majority of the demo and presentation, do hold them until the end, unless it's something that you have to fight out. But we will make sure there's time. And
oh yeah, we'll be available for after the session as well. So for the next part, I'm going to show you the actual app that I created earlier, and all I've done is just add some data. I have done no customization at this point. I've just gone in and added some data to this app. So we have some pictures here. This is our list control. So let me switch over to the items. So here's a list of the drinks that we've put into this already. Scott apparently has a lot of drinks that he's familiar with.
Love to sample.
Love to sample. Yeah, that's what you keep telling yourself. So what you see here is this list control here is used for our navigation. If I click on one of these records, the right section over here shows the details for that particular drink. Again, this is the default that we gave you. You can also customize these fields more to your liking. So if I wanted to search for something, we have built-in search filter capability. So if I wanted to search for, do we have anything in here for gin? We actually have four records returned. And if you notice, gin is in the name of the first 3 drinks. But on Super Fancy, the type is a gin. So Access found that record as well. So this search is baked in right into the list detail view for you. The second view we give for every table is a datasheet view. And of course, everyone's familiar with datasheets. It's just the standard way to show multiple records. I can highlight a specific record. I can delete. I can do some copy-paste if I want. You can also resize the column. This is the default width, but you can go into Access and make the defaults wider or narrower to your liking. We also have baked-in filtering and sorting capability on the data sheets. So if I wanted to go in and say, oh, look, McFadden here. Looks like Scott's been moonlighting and making a few drinks of himself.
Don't tell anybody.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody heard you. I can also clear the filter. I could apply multiple filters. I could hide the columns. If I wanted to sort the drink names in alphabetical order, that's all baked in. I've done no code, no macros, no anything. This is all the UI that we give you for free. If I want to go to a different type of view, let me jump over to the context. I put in just a few simple contact records here. This by group is a summary view. That's one of the other view types that we have. A summary view groups the common records. So in this particular case, this view is grouping by a field within the contacts table called group. And it's by business, family, or friends. The right side is showing you 4 fields from each of the related records. And if you see right here where my mouse is, it also shows the count for each of those. We also give you some drill through, pop through forms. If I just click on Jeff's record here, it opens up and actually shows the detail. So I don't have to leave the context to see that particular contact's information. I can just pull it up. I can navigate somewhere else, pull up Harrison's record here. That's the summary view. We also have a 4th view type called blank, which I'm not going to be showing here. Blank is just essentially, you can, if it's a bound blank view, you can show 1 record at a time, or you can use it just to get parameter information. You can have it bound or unbound. So let me go back to items here. If you notice, when I click back to items, it went back to the datasheet view. We remember the last view that you were on for each specific table. So I'm going to jump back to the list view. And I'm going to add a new drink here. And to do that, we have an action bar, these 5 buttons across the screen. We have add, delete, edit, save, and cancel. Right now, what you're looking at on the right side is what we call view mode. The data looks like it's displayed as labels. It's not editable at this point. If I want to edit a record, I can just click edit, and then as you can see, I can immediately start changing the data. If I want to add a new record, let's call it, how about TechEd Special? I don't know what's in it, but it sounds pretty good. And so let's do, how about Contoso for the producer? This is our multiple lines control. So if I wanted to type different things here, I can just hit return. We have different control types. Now, I don't know if you noticed that when I tabbed over to the type field, we actually had an input hint there. Let me tab out. You can see find is listed there as some input hint. That's the default input hint we give for an autocomplete control. That designates that this is an autocomplete control. You can change that and customize that if you want. An autocomplete control is new for our Access 2013 web apps. If I wanted to give this type, it's a Scotch. So if I type in S, Access has actually gone and searched through the categories table and pulled up anything that has the letter S in it. If I continue typing, C, now it's drilled down to, there's only two options there, and if I keep typing S-O-T, I don't see anything anymore. So I don't have Scotch in here. Now normally I would probably have to exit out of here. I've already got some data, so I might have to cancel out. I don't have to leave my context with the autocomplete control. I can click Add New Item. We open up a drill through pop-up for the categories table right here. I don't have to leave context, and I can actually type it right in. We also have keyboard shortcuts, so I can do Control S, save that. And if you notice, we have a little toast notification in the background. The changes were saved. And if I close, you'll see what happens is we filled it in for you automatically. You added that one. We're going to assume that you'd like to use that one instead of typing it again. Let's give this a quick rating of 4. If I click Save, you notice I get a toast notification is there, so we have a new record created. Below here on this list details view is what we call a related items control. Database, one-to-many relationships all over the place. So this is going to show you the many records, like child records. If you think of orders, order invoices. So the consumption log here, we include a link, and I can add a new consumption log here. If you notice, briefly, I don't know if you saw that, we filled in TechEd Special for you. Because this is a related record for the parent view that you're right on, we assume this is what you want. And let's use today's date and quantity. Scott had 2 of these, although that's probably not accurate. And
I'll make sure that's accurate later on.
Yeah. And there's also an image control there. We also have hyperlink controls, subview controls, web browser controls. I won't be showing all of these right now. After I click Save and Close, you'll notice this got added immediately to the related items control. And if I wanted to drill through and realize, okay, I don't think 2 was completely accurate, so let me go back in and change that. Let's be a little more accurate. That was probably 4. Go ahead and save. You can also use Escape to cancel and close out that pop-up view, and you notice it was already saved. You can also delete the record if I want. We give confirmation just in case. Are you sure? And we'll provide a toast notification there. The reason this has prevented me from deleting it is because I have a related record. If I wanted to fully delete it, I actually need to delete the many record first, and then I can actually control that. At the table level, you can add validation rules, field validation rules, compound indexes, all the familiar things that you would have in Access, but again, we're creating Access. We're creating SQL objects and SQL things on the tables, but you're using the Access design surface. One last quick thing before I turn it back over to Scott. Because we're baked in with SharePoint, we can also take advantage of themes. So here's just a generic SharePoint theme. All I've done is just change the SharePoint site theme at the parent level, and the Access UI just takes that into account. So if you have a custom theme, we will actually just snap to that. Let me switch back. So just as a quick recap, We have a polished, professional user interface very quickly. You can customize it further. We give you a lot of things right out of the box, but you can also make it, additional customizations, and Scott's going to show you a little bit of that later. The table selector on the left, that's where you select the table that you want to view. I didn't mention this earlier, but you can also hide tables. So if you have some admin tables or maybe some many-to-many tables that you don't want to show in the UI, you just go to Access and say, make this hidden, and it won't show up. It'll only show up in the Client Designer. Once you select the table, again, all across the top, you're going to select the view that you want to view from the data. You can do searching and filtering within the list control. And then you can also do the viewing of data and the editing of data within the details section. So the autocomplete control, as I mentioned, was new. This is where you can search across many different records. We also have combo box controls as well, but the autocomplete allows you to search across many records. I think our combo box control is limited to showing 500 records. We also have the datasheet view, of course. The drill through pop-ups come automatically. So all that you saw with it opening up the related records, I didn't do anything with that. Sorry about that. I didn't add any macros or VBA code, anything for there. It just opened up automatically by clicking the related items control or in the summary view. The summary view groups by specific categories. So imagine if you had a list of 10,000 products and you were grouping them by specific report groups. You could group by the report group and you could actually see everything listed on there. Related items control, that's also new for Access 2013. That's where we're actually going to show you the related records. You can have the drill through by clicking on it. You can also add. One thing I didn't show in this one, because this is the out of the box, we can also add some expressions in the bottom. So if you wanted to total something or average something, that's also baked into there as well. And of course, the action bar, that's where you're going to be adding new records, editing. One thing I didn't show also is you can also add custom action bar buttons. So if you wanted to make some custom macro actions next to those, you can do that as well. So let me turn it back over to Scott, and he's going to talk a little bit about the design experience within Access.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, for showing how to build an app in pretty close to 60 seconds, thereabouts. And then how easily you can actually make that app somewhat useful. You can actually add the content, the data to it. Didn't have to do any of this work in the designer. This is all something that came for free. So if you want to make it better and really kind of fun, what you can do is you can actually add a whole bunch more information. And I've done this by going into the designer. I'm going to show you a little bit first about the app. First thing we've done is we've created a new welcome screen, which is a blank view or a blank screen with a subview we've added. And I'll show you this when I go into the designer. We've also added the ability to see the drink type as well as all of the associated types of beer. For example, I like a stout now and then. You can see that I've already had a few of these. I'm just making sure that they're good. A few of those. And then I've had a few of the cream stouts as well I like to compare. So I've had a few of these drinks. And what this allows me to do here by this I drank this button, and making it big, making it easy, to find something that you've actually gone out and tasted. Let's go ahead and go in here and do, actually, let's go to cocktails. I think I had a cocktail last night. Within here, I tasted a Sazerac. Anybody had a Sazerac before? Anybody? Nobody's going to admit to it? He's had two of them, yeah? That's good. So I had one of these the other night. It was pretty good. The bartender told me that it was the best in all of New Orleans. I thought it was pretty good, but I wanted to test out others, so I've tried a few others of these as well. And he was right. The one that I had at the Lowe's Hotel was better than the one that I had at the Sheraton. So what I want to do now is show you how easy it is to add this to my consumption log. By clicking the I drank this button, what it's going to do, and Jeff mentioned this earlier, it's going to pop up this drinking log pop-up, and it's going to populate it with the drink that I was on. I can add when I drank this. It's pretty simple to do. I had this one last night at the Lowe's Hotel. I probably spelled that wrong. And I had two, and that was because they were really good. So I had a couple of them. So by saving this here, it'll add it into my consumption log, and I'll go ahead and switch to show that here as well. But looking at this, one thing I don't have here is I don't have the ability to track who I was with. So I want to know who my friends were with me when I was out with them drinking. I'm going to go ahead and add that in, but just to prove that I had a Sazerac last night, here it is right here. It shows up in my consumption log. So I can track everything I've drank. I could also track coffee or water or soda pop. It's not all about the good stuff. So what I want to do now is I want to show you how easy it is to go in and actually add my drinking buddies, or the people I was with, into this application. So what I would do, simply enough, I'd go into Customize and Access. And that would take me to the Access client, which I have open here. So this is where we actually took the app that Jeff had created, extended it a little bit more, created some different tables, created this homepage view, created different pop-ups for the consumption log as well. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and add a new table in here that allows me to track who I was with when I was drinking. So I'm going to add a new table. And where Jeff earlier, he started by creating the app by looking through a template selection, I'm going to go ahead and create a blank table. And I'm going to go ahead and track in this blank table friends. And it's going to be a short text. I'm going to save this table as drinking buddies. I'm brand new to Access. I'm not a developer. It's really easy to do. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go ahead and close it. So you can see what that's done now. That's actually created a drinking buddies table here and two other views over here in the forms, or two other forms over here as well. So what I want to do now is I want to actually add that option to my consumption log. So I'm going to say buddies. This is going to be a lookup to the table I just created. Let's look up to my drinking buddies, and it's going to bind it to my friends. I'm going to go ahead and save this now. And once I'm done saving this, I'm going to go ahead and make one minor change. What I need to do now is I actually need to go into my consumption log pop-up. That's what you saw. When I chose I drank this, it brought a pop-up up. I want to go ahead and add in here now my buddies.
This was a custom view that you created earlier, right?
This is a custom view I created earlier. You didn't see this in the first two demos that Jeff had shown, but we created this custom view here. It's a pop-up that allows you to choose I drank this and auto-populate from the drink that you're selecting. So I've added buddies into here right now. I can change this to I drank with. And I'll save this here. If I go back to my view here, complete, and refresh this, I should be able to choose a friend to have a drink with. So let's choose a beer, and we'll have a Doppelbock. I drank this. And you can see now that in this pop-up view, I have my buddies option here. So I drank this, planning ahead. This is for tomorrow. Where'd you drink it? Superdome. Dome. That's pretty awesome, by the way, isn't it? We get a party at the Superdome. Fantastic. So one, and who'd I drink with? I drink with Jeff Conrad. He's not in there, so I'm going to go ahead and add him. And you're going to see it's going to bring up a pop-up. Jeff Conrad. Save this here. Save this here. Close this down. Save that, yes. And now if I go back into my consumption log, you'll see what I had tomorrow. Did I do this right? You should see what I've drank tomorrow is going to be the Doppelbock with Jeff. Fingers crossed. I don't know why it didn't work. Author? Any ideas?
I'm wondering if you didn't actually save it.
Did I not save it here? Is it always the simplest thing?
Could be. You could just try adding it again, new record.
Let's see what happens here. Yeah. Oh, see, you get cocky, you start to fall apart. So there he's in there, consumption log. Okay, versus letting this kind of go on and on, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. It is as easy as what you've seen if you're good at this. If you're good at this, you can make it work. I can figure this out. If you weren't watching, it would be a breeze.
He's new to the team.
I'm new to the team, yeah. So it's really that simple. You can go ahead and you can choose the Access app you're working with. You can customize. Takes you into the designer. Once you're in the designer, adding tables is easy. You can choose to add them from a template, which we've seen before. You can choose to add them from a brand new blank table, which what I have done. Easy enough to choose lookup from the consumption log form, and then pointing to that file that I added my buddies to, I can make it really extensible. So it's pretty easy to do this kind of stuff. It works every other time, but I'm not sure what I did here. So to recap, we started with an app that was built in 60 seconds, bare bones, but it was a full app. It has everything you need to get going. Jeff spent some time and he actually added some content to it. I took that app and I took it into the designer and extended it a little bit, made it a little bit more useful, allowed me to drink with my friends, allowed me to track the drinks I've had. And it was all done through the actual simple means of choosing Customize and Access. Okay? Once you're in the Access client, you can see that I have the navigation pane. That's going to show me all my forms, all my tables. If I had macros, it'll show me the macros and queries as well. They're all easy to find. Adding a table I mentioned, there's multiple ways you can do this. Simplest way is looking for a template. That'll give you a good place to start. You don't have to think too much. You can add the blank table, as I had done, or if you have data stored somewhere else, you can see in the bottom here, different Access database, Excel, a CSV file, you can bring that data in easily and create tables as well. So there's many ways to go ahead and get started. And then there's also the advanced features. I didn't show any of these, but when you're in a table, you can actually easily add a query view, add a new datasheet view. You can add your macros, data macros, UI macros directly onto this view, onto this form that you're working on. So it's all right there. You don't have to know it all. I don't use a lot of this stuff. Stick with what you know, but as you go ahead and learn more and more, you can increase. And it's really easy to find how to build an app. So architectural overview. Mentioned the web browser is where your runtime is stored and run. Your Access client, specifically used for your designing of the app. All of your information is stored on SharePoint. Access services is stored in O365 if you're running in the cloud. And your data is stored in SQL database in the cloud. So the client creates the HTML and JavaScript. The runtime renders your HTML and JavaScript in the browser, and it connects to your database, SQL database in the cloud. If you are not running a cloud solution, you're running on-prem, minor change, you lose your cloud, and basically you need to install your Access services on-premise and your SQL server on-premise. But really, everything else is the same. How you manipulate the data, how you interact with the client, it's the same. The output, the web browser, the same. OK, so we have a few more demos. That kind of concludes how we build things in Access and how you get started and get going. But Jeff's going to show you now that this is really something that is backed by SQL. And you can manipulate the data in SQL. If you're a SQL person, not me, many of you are, he'll show you how to do that as well as some data manipulation through Excel.
Thank you, Scott.
So Jeff?
So what you see here is essentially the app that I was working on, the one that has just the data. That's not the fully baked one, the one where Scott actually added some more customizations to it. And again, there's a lot more customizations that you can do than we can just present in 60 minutes, 75 minutes. So if you wanted to see some additional samples, will be available afterwards as well. But I wanted to make sure that we drove home the point that this data isn't actually SQL. So if I go back to the backstage here, you'll notice that this Manage button is here. And if you click this, let me just quickly walk through what these options are. If you select from my location or from any location, you can open up the firewall in SQL Azure to allow external connections. Right now, this client database is the only one that's available to talk with the SQL Azure, except, of course, if you're using in the browser. You can also enable read-only connections. You can view the read-only connection information. You can enable read-write connections. You can view the connection information. Let me just click that so you can see where this information is coming from. We present to you the server name, the database name, the username that we're actually connecting with that has the read-write permissions, and the actual password. So if I can take that information and just fire up SQL Server, I've already made that connection in the interest of time here. And as you see, this is a SQL Azure database running up on Office 365. I'm connected, and I can see essentially the full SQL database here. If I expand the tables, you can see there's our 4 tables: the categories, consumption log, contacts, and items. We've made it a much more friendly name. We just append access dot and then your name rather than some random GUID. Our system tables all begin with access system. Ideally, those are hands-off. If you start messing with those and you're outside support, obviously we want you to be designing within client. However, you can go in here and essentially do whatever you'd like to do with SQL, but after that you might be doing something that's not okay with Access Client Designer. I have all the data showing with a simple select statement here from the items table. If I switch back to the browser and let's search for Stout. Oops. I'm going to search for that one since that's the first record that's actually showing within SQL, so it'll be easier. So we have Imperial Stout here, and we have Imperial Stout here. Let's see, which one? Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong view. Make sure I'm on the right view. Here's the Imperial Stout. And just to show, let's make this extra delicious here. Save that change. Let's go back to SQL. Keep an eye on that field there. I'm going to execute this. It's going to actually just run that simple select again. And again, this is going against SQL Azure on Office 365. If it was local, it would be on your local. And as you see, the field was correctly updated. So this is, yes indeed, working against SQL Azure. I can also do an update, simple update statement. If I wanted to update that record to have a different new drink name, we'll call it Imperial Stout New. Let's just run that. Click OK. Connect that up. One row affected. It should have been changed. One other little quick thing here. You can also open up Access table data sheets and query data sheets within Access. So if I go to the items gear here and say view data, you'll notice all the changes that we made in the browser as well as SQL are here. And if I wanted to change that one more time, with the datasheet view, all you have to do is navigate off the record and we do an automatic save, and that's different than the other views. If I go back to the browser and refresh, and hopefully it will come back. And we'll search for Stout again. Oh, if I can spell right. You can see all the changes we made within the browser, all the changes we made within SQL, all the changes we made within Access Client. All the data is kept in sync there because all the data is directly within SQL. So just a really simple recap here on the SQL part. We have the unobscured table names. As you saw, we just append access dot and then your table name. It's much easier to find an items table or a contacts rather than a very long GUID. The SQL login, the username, password, we expose within the Access client, and you can hand that, essentially that information off to any particular program that supports the ODBC, and you can actually use that connection information to change the data from the other applications as well as within the browser. So let me switch back to another demo on now connecting that information with Excel. We actually have a blog post on our Access team site that actually walks through all the process that you need to do for the Excel. There we go. So I essentially just went to those that are familiar with data connections within Excel. We have the connection information. And let me just pull up. We actually have this one right here. Oh, too far. And we'll have that link in the slide deck as well. There's a few steps that you need to do through the wizard for the data connection, but you're getting that same information through the managed connection options, the server name, database name, username, password. You just give that to Excel, walk through the wizard steps, and I just made a simple pivot chart here using the items and consumption log information, and as you can see, it's graphed out with data there. The last date that we have is 5/31. So let me switch back to the consumption with data. And let's add one more thing. Let's add, how about mimosa? Yes, we do have mimosa. And we had that today. And let's go, what do you think? 4 or 5?
4 or 5.
4 or 5. Sure. We'll err on the side of caution there.
Prepping for a demo.
Yes. Click Save. And let me just switch back to Excel. And all I have to do is refresh. While I'm waiting for that to refresh, I noticed the first one, 5-1, 17 drinks. Was that your spec review day?
That was probably me working on my review, I'm guessing, is what that was.
That was a heavy drinking day, Scott.
That's May Day. I celebrate all the holidays, so that's probably May Day.
Yeah, with these Excel pivot charts, for those that are Excel gurus, you can just party on. As you can see, that data has now been updated right inside our Excel pivot chart. So you can connect this up with anything that supports that connection information. So you can use the Access web app as the design experience, the browser as the runtime, and you can also connect that up with other programs to view and pivot, report on that particular kind of data. Switch back. So just a quick recap on that. Remember that connection information is available within the Backstage view. We have the 4 pieces of information there. The one I didn't show you is you can open up a read-only connection, and you could hand that out to people. If you don't want people messing with the data, you can hand them that connection information, and they can use that to make some own pivot charts or whatever you'd like, or connecting it with another Access client desktop database, but you don't want them changing the data. You can connect that from anywhere. The example, just a quick one we used here, everybody uses Excel, and you can use that connection information to pivot on that. You can make nice charts, or if you just want to catalog the items that you have. So I wanted just one quick slide here. All this week you've been hearing apps, 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 apps. You've been hearing a lot with Office for apps. You've heard SharePoint apps. Of course, now we have Access web apps. So this slide is just, we want to make sure that you understand exactly this particular part of Access. We are an app for SharePoint. It's fully functioning within SharePoint. We can take advantage, as you saw, of some of the SharePoint functionality. We have the permissions. We have the site themes. The other big thing that you've been hearing this week is probably apps for Office. That's not the same thing as this. Apps for Office is essentially extending the Office applications using HTML, JavaScript with little content Office apps, task pane apps. Those are used for Word, Excel, and Outlook. So just want to make sure you're not confused. We're not an Office web app. We are essentially a SharePoint app, but we're an Office program. All right. So let me turn it over to Scott. Scott's going to talk a little bit about the SharePoint store.
So this is our very last demo here. Then we'll go ahead and make sure we do leave time for questions. I promised we would, and I will not lie to you about that. So before we go into the questions, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the SharePoint store. We've mentioned that these apps are easy to find, they're easy to save. they're easy to upload to the SharePoint store as well. And what I've done here is I've gone into any of your Access or your SharePoint sites. From within the team site, I can choose site contents, and then I can go and add an app. When I choose to add an app, I can navigate to the SharePoint store.
Yeah, we're not seeing.
Oh, no. Do you remember what I said? So what I've done is I've gone into the team site. From within the team site, I chose site contents. And within the site contents, there's a SharePoint store link on the left that brings me into the SharePoint store. Now that I'm in the store, I can see all types of SharePoint store apps, or I can choose to find an app that is Access only. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So there are Access apps built on Access 2013 that are in the store right now. These are actually live. I'm going to go ahead and open one up. You can see there's details about the app. It can be rated. It's like any other app in the SharePoint store, but these are built on Access. So easy enough for you to create your app, to add it to the store, make it available to anybody for free or for fee. It's just that simple. So I'm going to go ahead now and quickly get through the last few slides, leaving time. So I mentioned that you can save your Access database as an app package, so .app file. You can do that. Once you do that, you can bring it into the store. You can bring it back into Access. You can take it with you, so you don't have to have the actual Access server available to get to the app file. You can save this out to your desktop, and you can bring it back into Access Client, and you can output that and save that to the store. Okay. So a little bit about the earlier versions of Access. So migration. You can take your data from earlier versions. You can bring it into the 2013. You can import data from, I mentioned Access and Excel, other SQL servers. You can bring that forward. The desktop databases versus the web apps. Desktop, rich functionality. It's VBA. Supported in 2013. The web apps, it's easy to share. We've talked about that. No code. It uses macros, so you're not having to write code in order to build a really cool web app. Uses the latest technology and new functionality. Okay, so there's some differences there. So 2010, what about Access 2010? Tables were stored in SharePoint lists. That was new in 2010. They still run in Access 2013. You can migrate your data to 2013 SharePoint apps into a SQL backend. So you can actually take apps you built in 2010 and move them forward and build web apps from them. So you're not starting from scratch. So we've shown you a fun app today. It's the consumption log app, something we built for the demo. But there are other apps we've been building for internal use at Microsoft.
Yeah, we want to make sure that you're just not thinking Access is great for just making drinking apps.
Which it is.
It is, but there's a lot more that you can do. A quick example on after we shipped Office 2013. Whenever Office ships a new version, it's a time when people can move to different teams. They maybe want to try out something else. You can think of it as a very large musical chairs. Everybody shuffles and then sits down on a new team. Office is a very large division, thousands and thousands of people. We created an Access web app and reseated everybody in the Office organization. We created this app, and I believe just a couple of days, we essentially got a data dump from our HR department, from Excel. Myself and one of the other program managers worked on this app. Since it was HR data, we had to be very careful about anybody looking at this. If somebody walked into my office, I had to literally shut down so nobody could see anything. But we just imported that data into the Access web app. We customized the views a little bit to what HR wanted, and within just easily a couple of days, we had this app up and running. Throughout the whole cycle, it was probably about 6 weeks was this whole seeding organization time. They continually asked for us to make changes, more changes, more changes. We would just make a change. They'd send us like through link or email. We'd make a change, save it, say just refresh your browser, you should see the change now. So this was all the way from the director levels, the VPs, the managers, the triad level. Those were the people that actually used the app. So Access has been given some huge exposure within Office. We also have one of our developers who's very much into cricket and soccer. He created an Access web app, and it's currently being used by over 900 people inside the organization. LCA, we have a legal department using Access web app to track some of their contact data. We have a TAP program created by some of the support people using an Access web app. One of my good friends who's now on the Exchange team, he's actually using Access web app to be tracking a lot of the Exchange server issues. So if there's alerts or something wrong with the service or system, he's actually using an Access web app for that. We've also used Access to be tracking trainings that employees have been taking and the feedback from those, because sometimes if you want to get that feedback, some other tools, it's not as easy. Access being a relational database with the SQL backend, it just makes sense. So we want to leave you with this slide here just to make sure you're not just coming away with, yes, Access makes drinking apps. Woo-hoo. That's all we do.
But we can.
But we can.
So to show off some of the great work that Jeff's done, he has a book coming out. Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so
Pimp your book?
it's by oh, thanks, God. It's by MS Press. Should be out within just by the end of this month or early next month. The first 600 pages of the book I completely devote to Access web apps because that's what our focus was for this last release. I also have some sample chapters, so if anybody wants to come up afterwards, they're signed. I have about 5 or 6 copies. So if you want to learn more about Access web apps, hopefully you can maybe check that book out later.
Yeah, so the great thing about this book, and I learned some of this from Jeff today, we've shown you, a lot of what you can do in Access, but it's still just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. Jeff gets into the macros. It's easy to understand. He explains it to me. I understand what he's talking about. So I think this book is actually pretty awesome, and it takes you a lot further than what we've shown you today.
There's some other elements about Access web apps that we just didn't cover, like with data macros and UI macros. The data macros, when you're writing those within Access, those are for updating records or adding new records or deleting records. When you're writing those within Access using our macro designer, we save those up, write out T-SQL, and we're creating SQL triggers and SQL stored procedures.
So enough about that. We are at time for Q&A. Hands come up. So if you have a question, I do recommend you go to the microphone if you could, please, so everybody can hear.
But if you wanted to leave now, if you
want to go,
you wanted,
thank you for attending.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
We also have some shirts available, some sample stuff. I also have a few free Office 365 one-year subscription cards for some lucky few people.
You with the microphone, fire away.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you pull in data from MOS 2007? I think you answered you can pull it in from 2010, but can you go as far back as 2007 to a SharePoint list?
I think you can. I believe you can. As long as you can. As long as Access can get that information, if you just give the credential information, as if it's on a different SharePoint site.
Right, so it'd be different farms.
So on the Getting Started screen at the bottom, we essentially have a SharePoint list. You can also link to any SharePoint list within the same site. Those will be read-only, but you can also do an import from any SharePoint site. And I do think it might work with 2007 data as well. It's a good question. Thank you. Come up for something.
Do you have any guidance for, you had that slide about migrating old Access apps into 2013.
Yeah.
Do you have any guidance for sort of managing that process of converting shadow IT apps that may or may not have tons of macros and or VBA in it and converting them so we can turn them into these web apps?
It's another good question. So right now, what we can do is we can bring in the data, but essentially form logic, UI macro logic, all that kind of stuff. You either have to use what we have and then customize it, or just completely start from scratch. We don't have a story there yet for actually bringing over a lot of those other elements, unfortunately.
And reports? Is that also reports?
So with reports, now I didn't show you this, but I can take the connection information, create an Access local desktop database with nothing in it, point to the tables, and use them as link, and I can use all the reporting knowledge I have within Access. If you're familiar with Access, you can use all that reporting knowledge within Access to do reports there. Or, of course, you can jump it over to Excel and do some nice pivot charts there
But
as well.
those old reports will migrate to 2013, all right?
Well,
Even if they don't go up to the web, they'll...
so there's no reports within the Access 2013 web apps itself, but imagine if you had a front end and a back end, local database. You can create an Access web app, import the data into there. If these were linked to there, you can just delete the links to that particular one, point them up to there, and everything should still just work.
Okay, great, thanks.
It's a good question.
In SharePoint, since it's in SharePoint, do you get to use like some of the workflow functionality, or
Great
not?
question.
Or does that not
Great
included?
question. Thanks. Sorry, I missed the question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Since you are in the Access app is in SharePoint, does it have any workflow functionality, like when you're adding a new item to the list, or?
Good question. No, and the reason for that is because we're essentially just using SharePoint as the hosting part. So we can link to a SharePoint list within the same site. So if you have workflows on there, obviously those will be kicking off. But that's just a read-only connection, and if all the data is within SQL. So we're not using any workflows from there. But you can create data macros that will actually named ones that will be SQL stored procedures. But we're not hooked up with any of the workflows, like we could be with the 2010 web databases, because those were SharePoint lists. It's a good question. Do you want some? Lots of questions. This is good. Free stuff. Yeah, free stuff. Thanks. It was a good question.
That was my question. Can I still have stuff?
Oh, sure. Come on. That's fine. Good question. I like that. Thanks for coming. Yes?
Actually, I got two questions.
Ooh,
the
two
first
questions.
one
Nice.
is, can you build a solution in Access 2013 and publish it to SharePoint 2010?
An Access web app that you just saw here?
Yes.
No. So Access 2013 web apps require SharePoint 2013 and SQL 2012 if you're doing on-prem.
2012?
That was my question. Is this the minimum?
The other one
Yes,
is,
minimum SQL 2012, SharePoint 2013 for the Access web apps for 2013.
the other one is, just like in 2010, I noticed y'all had a template for a web app and another template for the fact client. So there's still limitations on what you can publish to SharePoint and what you can do in a regular Access database?
So the legacy Access database stuff, all that's still there. But from the web app standpoint, obviously there's a lot of things within a web app with Access that they just don't translate well between that and a legacy desktop database. So we have essentially what we kind of call internally just kind of a walled garden experience. We have essentially an HTML page right within there. I'm not sure if Scott mentioned that. When he was designing those views, that's an HTML page right within the Access client frame. When he dragged in from the field list, that's the Win32 component, and he just dragged it right onto the HTML page. What we try and do is make sure that we only show you controls, properties, anything that we've already accounted for and can be translated up into SQL easily. Right. The expressions that we use, we didn't talk about expressions. The expressions that we show in Access web apps are going to be different than they are in a legacy desktop database. So you'll actually see some functionality, some expressions and functions within the web apps that you don't see in a desktop database. So we can take advantage of like coalesce, which isn't available within a desktop database.
Thanks.
Good questions. Yes?
A question about look and feel. So you mentioned being able to utilize SharePoint themes, but what about modifying SharePoint master pages and style sheets and things like that to get additional look and feel customizations?
Well, that's a good question. From the standpoint of what we can do with the SharePoint theming type stuff, what I briefly saw there is I just went to the SharePoint themes page and just changed the theme, and we just inherited from that. I think from the master page elements, I don't think we hook much into that to a certain extent. Certainly that's something that we've had some feedback on already, so we can take that back to the team as far as if I was to bounce it back to you, what would you like to see?
Well, I saw that the look and feel is very much the Office 2013 with the buttons and the colors, but if you could change the buttons and put some more custom theme elements around it, headers, things like that.
Yeah.
Menu
Like
items.
quick launch area, some other menus and things like that, right?
The quick launch area, as far as the SharePoint Chrome, we essentially just show you back to site so you can navigate back up to the parent and our customize and access button. I think part of that, and this is probably going for the program management team from last release, it's essentially just to make sure that we don't just drop you an experience where now you're completely confused about whatever else is going on with SharePoint. We just want to show you the minimum amount so that way, less is more, I guess is the term that
there
we
were some
try to use.
hard decisions I think made the previous year to simplify it a little bit, to keep it on the rails so people don't get confused. We wanted to simplify it so they can make apps without having too much information. I know that some people want that extra data that used to be there, the extra extensibility that used to be there, but there's been a trade-off, so we have simplified it a little bit.
Yeah. It's a good question.
You're not actually in SharePoint at that level. It's not, it looks like SharePoint, but it's not SharePoint.
It's
Right.
just, yeah, it's housed within SharePoint, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question.
Shirt?
Sure. How many more do we have?
Constellation. You get a shirt.
We got one more shirt. One more shirt.
Thanks.
So
Yes.
I think you kind of already answered this, but I'm curious. So in a list, you've got user level, item level security, where you can lock things down so I can just see what I put in. That is not possible then?
I'm glad you asked that, and since we have a program manager here, he will take that feedback. We've already received some other feedback as well on that. Currently, we don't have like a row-level type security. We do have some kind of security within the UI to a certain extent. We can just know who you are, but we don't have a way to actually apply specific things to specific rows. You can write some data macros to do some things, and you can take from the UI layer, you can pass down some parameters and say, I'm this person, and actually have it kick back out. And because it's a SQL transaction, it's either all going in or it's not going in. But right now, we don't have that row-level security. When we were creating the app for the whole office division type seating, that was one thing that they requested. We wanted the row-level security. And
it's a
and
fine
we really
grain,
don't have that.
permissions type
Yeah.
solution. So we are looking at that. It doesn't exist now. No guarantees on that, but we have heard it both internally and externally.
I would assume then that would be an important thing for you.
That would be very important.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you still handle that on the back end, though?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Not to that level.
Yeah. Good question.
Last
Yes.
T-shirt here.
Yes.
I'm curious about what an administrator has in terms of governing performance, monitoring performance. Oh, I put it out there for 10 users, now 1,000 users are using it, it fell over. Which app was it? Those sort of controls that might be in place.
It's a good question. It's kind of on the services side of things. Now, if it's Office 365, then most of that would be not available to the actual end user or the end administrator, because obviously Microsoft's going to be handling that. And we have a lot of infrastructure in place. A good portion of the team is devoted to the services side of things. If you're in-house, then your admin can essentially, I believe, I'm not entirely sure, but I believe they should be able to see how much the database is in use, what the size is, how many people are actively using it. Right now, a problem that we hear from IT a lot with Access client desktop databases, they're proliferated throughout individual workstations, they're in file folders. IT has no idea how many of these are out there, how many are used, are they being backed up. But as far as the administration, you can use the diagnostic logging that's within SharePoint, and we have logging entries for Access services. So if there's a specific issue that's happening, you should be able to trace it back. We also display correlation IDs for specific errors or service errors. Those will be surfaced, and you can hand those off to the admin for the correlation ID, and they can easily search through the diagnostic logging for that. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, a little bit.
I've messed with it already. So in Central Lab, there's a whole section now called apps. So it tells you what apps are running on your server and how many times it's been used or the last time it was used. That kind of stuff.
Thank you. Yeah.
You said that we had read-only access to SharePoint lists without having to import the data, right?
You can, if you have an Access web app, and if you have a SharePoint, if it's in a SharePoint site, if there are lists within that SharePoint site, you can link to any of those as long as you have permissions. You can link to those, but those will be read-only. We'll create what you see as a table in that table selector on the left, and we'll create some automatic views for it as well. But the action bar will be completely dimmed out because it's just read-only. But
Do we have access to any of the managed metadata, or just SharePoint lists?
Right now, you can only link to SharePoint lists within that same site. You could use that data as a lookup value within the other Access web tables if you want, but that's the only thing that it can actually connect up to at this time.
All right, and then last question. You said you said that the data goes into a SQL Server database instead of SharePoint lists.
Yep.
Is that an option? Can we choose to put the data in the SharePoint list instead of a SQL Server database?
For that answer, we would say then use the Access 2010.
So load both services.
Yes.
Service
So
apps.
you can actually use Access 2013 to create Access 2010 web databases, but we don't have a create option. But all you have to do, there's two options to actually do that. If you have an existing web database, you can hydrate it down into Access 2013 and make changes. That still functions. I helped test that. I know that. Or if you know, you can just grab one of the 2010 web templates off office.com and open that, and that will actually be open within Access 2013, and you can publish it to a SharePoint site. On my own personal Office 365 site, I have 2010 style web databases and 2013 web apps on my same Office 365 site. They can't see each other to a certain extent unless they're in the same site. So if I have the web database in a subsite, I think I can actually read the data, but again, I can't exactly get them to work together because they're separate entities. But obviously our focus is now on our 2013 web apps with SQL as the back end.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good question. Yes?
Okay, I have a sort of a SQL maintenance issue. So if this is easy, I get a couple hundred power users going out and creating these. It was mentioned that each one of these creates its own SQL database. Each SQL database requires, management, DBA stuff, how you set up the transaction logging, backups, that sort of stuff. Is there some way of, putting these all in a single database, or am I going to end up with several hundred?
It's a good question. So right now, how the infrastructure works is we create one SQL database for every Access web app that you create. That's the design right now. That's the architecture. There's no way to customize that to a certain extent and have it go against the other one. Do you see this as a potential roadblock for you, as a deal breaker?
Well, each SQL database, we mirror it off, and that you have to watch out for transaction logs growing, and they just take some amount of maintenance for each database. Mm-hmm. And so, if it added tables to a single one, that would be easier to handle.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take that feedback back to the team. Good. Thanks.
Thank you.
How are we doing on?
We have a minute and a half left, so we have
before
one.
We get kicked out. Yeah.
Two.
Go ahead.
So if I understood you right, to be able to create an Access 2010 or SharePoint 2010 Access Services database in 2013, you would open it as a blank template and then publish?
Yeah. So we remove the option that on the Getting Started screen that was essentially a blank web database that you saw in 2010, because obviously we want to be pushing people towards our web app story. But if you have an existing 2010 web database published, you can still edit that. What I've done personally is I still have copies of all Access versions. I just open up Access 2010. I click Create Blank Web Database, didn't put anything into it, and then I just opened that up with 2013 and started working on it and then published. So it will still publish, you can still edit, but you just can't create that first new blank web database with 2013. But if you open up a web database in like an earlier version and then just so you have it, you can open it up with 2013 and publish it. So we actually had to do testing on our team to make sure you can actually still publish as well as edit everything within 2013.
Yeah,
but obviously our focus is we'd love you to do the 2013 web apps.
we've been able to edit the 2010 databases in 2013 without any issue, but we're rolling out Office 2013, but not SharePoint 2013.
Okay.
So we're not going to be able to use that. Our BI teams that are using Access to create and provision these new databases aren't going to be able to use the tools that we're going to be rolling out mandatory and removing previous versions.
Yeah, that could be an issue then. Yeah, if for the 2013 web apps, it has to be SharePoint 2013. If it's SharePoint 2010, we can only just do the 2010 web database functionality then, unfortunately.
There's no intrinsic reporting support?
Not within the web apps itself, but you can Excel, Access, client desktop databases, Crystal reports, anything that can just get that connection information. Is reporting functionality baked within the browser something that you okay? Is that something like if you were to rank it 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, what would?
It'd be very high because you have a user go and create an app and can't how do they get reports and information out of it.
Right. Yeah. We actually see this potentially as an upsell for somebody that wants to put something in the SharePoint store. Imagine somebody says, I have this simple or relatively simple web app. They package it up, and on their home screen they say, hey, if you'd like some custom reports made for this, or you want me to customize it more, just here's my email address. You put it up in the store. Somebody downloads it. Hey, it contacts you. Hey, I'd like some custom reports. They call you, and billable hours. Yeah.
Our users like quick-based. We're trying to get them off quick.
Yes.
I'm hoping this is the way.
For me, it's a personal thing. I love reporting with the web databases in 2010, where you could actually view the report within the browser. Not having that in 2013, for me personally, it's yeah.
Is it coming? Is it something?
No comment at this time, of course.